She thought moving into a quiet neighborhood would bring peace. Instead, every step outside her door felt like walking into a storm she never asked for. It wasn't her clothes, her smile, or even her voice that made her a target. It was something deeper, something she couldn't change. And one ordinary afternoon, that hatred spilled over, striking not just her, but the loyal service dog she depended on. What happened next wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. But the real question is, would anyone finally hold her tormentor accountable? Life had finally started to feel stable for Maya. After years of hard work, she had found a rhythm that gave her both pride and peace. She was a young black woman in her early 30s, living alone in a modest townhouse community where manicured lawns and freshly painted fences suggested safety. For her, this neighborhood represented a quiet victory, a place where she could breathe, heal, and live without looking over her shoulder. Maya worked as a medical assistant at a local clinic, a job that demanded long hours and endless patience, but she loved it. Her co-workers described her as steady, dependable, the kind of person who could calm a room just by walking into it. But outside of work, she carried a burden most people couldn't see. Years earlier, an accident had left her with a lasting condition that made everyday tasks unpredictable. That's why Shadow, her golden retriever service dog, wasn't just a companion, he was her lifeline. Shadow was trained to sense changes in her body before she even noticed them herself. He guided her through dizzy spells, steadied her when her legs betrayed her, and carried a quiet dignity that made strangers pause. With Shadow by her side, Maya's world opened up again. Trips to the grocery store, walks around the block, even long shifts at the clinic felt possible, manageable, safe. For months, everything seemed calm. Neighbors waved politely when she passed. Children sometimes asked to pet Shadow, though Maya explained gently that he was working. She was careful, respectful, and always mindful of the rules. She thought she was blending in. She thought she had finally found a home where she could just exist without constant judgment. But beneath the picture-perfect image of the neighborhood, cracks were forming. Maya began to notice the way one woman in particular, Margaret, the self-appointed leader of the HOA, watched her every move. Margaret was older, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who noticed the length of your grass or how quickly you moved your trash cans back from the curb. At first, Maya brushed it off as typical neighborhood fussiness. But slowly, Margaret's stares turned into whispers, and whispers turned into something heavier. It started with notes slipped under her door. Small complaints about Shadow, disguised as concerns. Some residents don't feel comfortable around large dogs. Please remember this is a pet-free zone. The irony was painful. Shadow wasn't a pet, and federal law made it clear that service dogs were protected. Still, Maya stayed polite, responding with printed documentation about her rights. She thought reason would be enough. She thought kindness might dissolve whatever tension lingered. But kindness has its limits when the other side isn't listening. And as spring turned into summer, Margaret's disapproval became something impossible to ignore. Maya would return home to find her trash bins overturned. Packages left outside her door went missing. Sometimes she'd catch Margaret watching from her window, expression tight with disapproval, as though Maya's very presence was an offense. Through it all, Shadow never faltered. He trotted beside Maya, calm and steady, carrying himself with a quiet nobility that often shamed the cruelty around them. But even he could sense her unease. His ears twitched when footsteps lingered too long outside. His body pressed closer to hers when whispers followed her down the sidewalk. He knew, even before Maya admitted it to herself, that the air in this so-called safe neighborhood was thickening with danger. Still, Maya told herself it would pass. She had endured worse before. She had survived tougher battles. This was just a clash of personalities. She thought, a woman with too much time and too little kindness. But in the back of her mind, a shadow of doubt crept in. Because Margaret wasn't just any neighbor. She had power, she had authority, and she had decided that Maya and her service dog didn't belong. What Maya didn't know was that this quiet war was about to erupt. And when it did, the cruelty would cut deeper than she ever imagined, because it wouldn't just target her. It would strike at the one being she couldn't live without. Maya had grown used to the subtle hostility, but nothing prepared her for the day it became impossible to ignore. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and she decided to take Shadow for a walk around the block. The sun was bright, children played with chalk on the sidewalks, and everything seemed ordinary until it was as she rounded the corner near Margaret's house. Shadow paused, his body stiff. Maya followed his gaze and saw Margaret standing in her yard, a spray bottle in hand, misting her roses. The moment their eyes met, Margaret's expression hardened. She didn't look at Maya as a neighbor. She looked at her as an intruder. First, Maya kept walking, determined not to invite conflict. But then it happened, a sudden sharp hiss, followed by Shadow yelping and jerking back. The spray wasn't water for flowers this time. The acrid smell burned Maya's nostrils as she realized Margaret had aimed it at Shadow. For a split second, Maya froze. Her mind reeled. Shadow whimpered, shaking his head, eyes blinking rapidly from the stinging liquid. Rage and disbelief surged through Maya at once. She stumbled to shield him, her heart hammering in her chest. This wasn't a petty note on her door. This wasn't whispered disapproval. This was assault and attack on the one creature who gave her independence and safety. Neighbors across the street looked on but stayed silent. Some lowered their gazes, pretending not to notice. Others lingered, their expressions unreadable. And in that silence, Maya felt the crushing weight of isolation. It wasn't just Margaret against her. It was Margaret backed by a wall of quiet complicity. She rushed Shadow inside, rinsing his fur and eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to stay calm. He nuzzled against her, tail weakly wagging, as if reassuring her instead of the other way around. But in that moment, Maya knew something had shifted. Margaret had crossed a line, and if she didn't act, it would only get worse. The following days became a blur of rising tension. Margaret didn't apologize. She doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, Maya overheard her railing against exceptions and special treatment, her voice dripping with contempt. She never said Maya's name, but everyone knew who she meant. Rules are rules, Margaret insisted, her eyes sweeping the room, daring anyone to challenge her. Maya sat silently in the back, gripping Shadow's harness. Her stomach knotted. No one spoke up for her. Not one voice defended her rights. And that silence cut deeper than Margaret's words. But Maya wasn't powerless. She began documenting everything, every note, every hostile glare, every incident of vandalism near her property. She reached out to advocacy groups, learning the exact protections federal law granted her. And yet, no matter how prepared she tried to be, the fear lingered. Because Margaret wasn't just cruel, she was escalating. One evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, Maya returned from work to find Shadow's outdoor water bowl tipped over, a bitter chemical smell rising from the damp concrete. Her chest tightened. Someone had tampered with it. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. She felt her safe space shrinking, walls closing in. That night, she lay awake, Shadow curled tightly at her feet. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every passing car sent her heart racing. She couldn't shake the thought. If Margaret was willing to harm Shadow once, what else was she capable of? And yet, the worst was still to come. Because a week later, the simmering tension erupted in the most public, undeniable way. Maya was walking Shadow near the community park when Margaret appeared again, this time with her spray bottle in plain sight. She didn't hide it. She didn't whisper. In front of families, children, and neighbors enjoying their afternoon, she raised it and aimed straight at Shadow. This time, Maya didn't move fast enough. Shadow yelped again, stumbling, and the gasps around them confirmed what Maya already knew. There were witnesses. The cruelty was no longer hidden in notes or whispers. It was blatant. It was vicious. And it was criminal. Maya's blood pounded in her ears as she pulled Shadow close, shielding him with her own body. Around her, neighbors muttered, unsure whether to intervene or walk away. But in the chaos, one thought seared into Maya's mind, clear and sharp. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is a crime, and it won't be ignored. The scream of Shadow's yelp still rang in Maya's ears when everything around her seemed to blur. Gasps from the crowd, the sharp hiss of the spray bottle, her own heartbeat hammering like thunder. For a moment, she couldn't move. It was as if time had cracked open, showing her two pads stand frozen and watch the cruelty continue, or fight back with everything she had left. She chose the latter. Maya pulled Shadow into her arms, crouching to shield him from Margaret's next attack. Her hands shook as she wiped the chemical residue from his fur, her lungs burning from the fumes. Around her, neighbors whispered, some lifting their phones to record, others backing away, unwilling to get involved. But Margaret? She stood tall, bottle still raised, eyes blazing with the satisfaction of someone who believed she was untouchable. This is against the rules, Margaret spat, voice sharp as glass. You don't belong here. Those words hit Maya harder than the spray itself. It wasn't just an attack on her dog. It was an attack on her existence, her right to live freely in a space she had worked so hard for. And in that moment, a fury rose inside her, not wild or chaotic, but steady and undeniable. Shaking, Maya pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she explained what had just happened, but she forced herself to be clear, to be precise. This is not a dispute, she told the dispatcher. This is an attack on my service dog. This is a crime. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited. Shadow leaned into her, his trust unwavering even as his body quivered. Every second without help felt like an eternity, and the weight of the onlookers' silence pressed down like chains. She could feel the judgment in their eyes, some pitying, some skeptical, some wishing she would just disappear and take her problems with her. Then came the sound that shifted everything, the wail of sirens cutting through the summer air. Heads turned, children froze mid-play, and for the first time, Margaret's confident smirk faltered. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser, their presence slicing through the tension. Maya's chest tightened as she held Shadow close. She had seen too many moments like this before, moments where the truth was twisted, where the victim became the accused. Fear and hope collided inside her, battling for control. Would these officers see what really happened? Or would they dismiss her pain, like so many others had? Margaret didn't wait. She launched into her defense, her voice shrill and commanding. She doesn't follow the rules. That dog isn't allowed here. I was protecting this neighborhood. Her words stumbled out like a rehearsed script, every sentence dripping with self-righteousness. But Maya didn't back down. She spoke through, the tremor in her voice, pointing to Shadow's vest, the medical tags, the documentation she always carried in her bag. She described every attack, every note, every moment of harassment, her words spilling out faster now, fueled by months of bottled fear. The officers listened. One of them crouched beside Shadow, noting his vest, his training, the way he stayed pressed against Maya's side despite his pain. And then, the words that cracked the silence wide open. Ma'am, the officer said, turning to Margaret, spraying a service animal isn't just harassment. It's a federal crime. The crowd rippled with shock. Some neighbors who had stayed silent suddenly whispered, eyes darting between Margaret and Maya. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. Margaret's face drained of color. Her voice faltered. She stammered, but the certainty she had always carried was gone. Maya stood there, heart racing, every nerve alive. She had endured months of torment, moments of humiliation, and the piercing isolation of silence. And now, at last, the truth was out in the open, undeniable. But even as Margaret froze, caught between outrage and fear, Maya knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning, because the real question lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. Would justice truly be served, or would the system find another way to let her down? The officer's words echoed in the humid air, heavier than anything Maya had heard in months. It's a federal crime. For the first time, Margaret's power cracked. The smug certainty drained from her face, replaced by something colder, fear. Neighbors who had once stood silent now shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had witnessed not just cruelty, but a crime. Some lowered their phones, others whispered, and the weight of their silence suddenly felt exposed. Maya held Shadow close, his fur damp, his body trembling against her. Relief didn't come instantly. Instead, her mind swirled with disbelief and exhaustion. It wasn't victory she felt in that moment, it was survival. She had done everything right, yet it had still come to this. Her dog injured, her dignity battered, and her faith in community fractured. The officers took her statement carefully, documenting every detail. They explained that charges could be filed, that Margaret could face consequences under federal law. For the first time, the word justice didn't feel completely out of reach. Yet Maya couldn't ignore the hollow truth that justice, even when possible, often arrived late and only after unbearable harm had already been done. In the days that followed, the neighborhood shifted. Some residents avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their silence. Others quietly offered apologies, too little and far too late. Margaret's influence within the HOA crumbled as word spread. But for Maya, the damage couldn't simply be erased. Each walk with Shadow now carried a shadow of fear. Each glance from a neighbor left her wondering if more hostility lingered behind polite smiles. And yet something else happened too. Maya found strength she hadn't realized she carried. She shared her story with advocacy groups, connected with others who had endured similar harassment, and spoke openly about the rights of those living with disabilities and service animals. The pain had scarred her, yes, but it also fueled her resolve. What had been meant to silence her instead became the spark of her voice. Shadow, ever faithful, healed slowly. His steady presence reminded Maya of resilience, not the kind that pretends nothing happened, but the kind that endures despite everything. With each step forward, she carried not just her own burden but the unspoken weight of countless others who had faced cruelty behind closed doors, in quiet neighborhoods, at the hands of those who believed rules and power could strip away dignity. Because Maya's story was not an isolated one. It was not just about a woman and her service dog. It was about the larger truth of how racism, discrimination, and ableism intersect to create environments where cruelty thrives unchecked until someone is forced to break the silence. It was about the neighbors who looked away until it was too late. It was about the systems that often fail to protect until undeniable evidence forces their hand. And it is about us, every single one of us, deciding what kind of community we choose to be. For Maya, the ordeal left scars, but it also left her with a deeper clarity. Silence protects the aggressor, not the victim. Standing by without action only ensures the harm continues. Her voice, her courage, and her refusal to let Shadow's pain be forgotten became her act of defiance. As so the question lingers not just for her neighborhood, but for everyone watching this story unfold. How many more times must someone be targeted before we refuse to look away? How many more shadows must fall before we shine the light of accountability? Because in the end, this isn't just Maya's story. It's a mirror, and the reflection staring back at us demands an answer. This wasn't just one woman's fight, it's a reminder of how fragile dignity becomes when silence stands beside cruelty. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think justice was truly served, or was this just the beginning of a bigger battle? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, don't just watch, spread it. Because change only starts when we refuse to stay silent.